Alice Jones gripped the steering wheel, her knuckles white. She was tense.
The car bumped along the narrow road. Trees pressed in on either side, their branches like skeletal fingers. Ashwood, the village she was heading towards, seemed to exist in perpetual twilight. Alice had craved a quiet life, away from the city's clamor. Now she wasn't so sure.
As she entered the village, a chill settled over her. The houses were dark, their windows blank eyes. The only sign of life was a stray dog, which watched her with unsettling intensity.
Alice parked in front of a quaint cottage, her new home. It was charming, but an undeniable air of melancholy hung over it. Alice shivered. She unlocked the door and stepped inside. The air was stale and cold. Dust motes danced in the weak sunlight filtering through the grimy windows. Alice took a deep breath, trying to quell the unease creeping up her spine. This was her fresh start. She had to make it work. She just had to ignore the feeling that something was terribly wrong. Sunday arrived, a day for new beginnings. Alice decided to visit the village church. Maybe finding faith would calm her nerves. The church was ancient, built from the same dark stone as the rest of the village. Its spire, crooked and worn, seemed to claw at the sky.
As Alice entered, the scent of incense and something else, something faintly metallic, hit her. The church was nearly empty. A handful of villagers occupied the pews, their faces etched with a severity that made Alice uncomfortable. They glanced at her with veiled curiosity, their eyes lingering a moment too long.
Alice found a seat near the back, her heart pounding. The silence was heavy, broken only by the rustle of her clothing. A man in priest's robes entered from a side door. He was tall and gaunt, his face obscured by the hood. As he passed Alice, he seemed to flinch. He hurried to the altar, his head bowed. When he finally turned, Alice saw his face. It was pale and drawn, marked by a deep sadness. This was Father Robert Collier, the village priest. He looked as haunted as the village itself. After the service, Alice lingered by the church door, hesitant to brave the walk home. An elderly woman with kind eyes approached her.
"You're new here, dear," she said, her voice surprisingly strong.
"Alice Jones," Alice replied, managing a small smile. "I just moved into the cottage on Elm Street."
The woman nodded. "Ah, yes, a charming place." Her smile didn't reach her eyes. "I'm Mrs. Farmer," the woman continued. "Welcome to Ashwood."
Alice thanked her, but couldn't help but notice the way Mrs. Farmer's gaze darted around, as if she were afraid of being overheard. "It's a quiet village," Alice offered, trying to make conversation.
Mrs. Farmer chuckled, a dry, humorless sound. "Quiet, yes, but not without its stories."
She leaned closer to Alice, her voice barely a whisper.
"There are things here, child. Things you wouldn't understand."
Before Alice could respond, Mrs. Farmer straightened up and patted her hand.
"Just be careful, dear. Some secrets are best left buried."
And with that, she turned and shuffled away, leaving Alice more unsettled than ever. The encounter with Mrs. Farmer left Alice with a knot of anxiety in her stomach. Her initial fear of the village had morphed into a chilling curiosity. She decided to visit the village graveyard, hoping to find some clue to the secrets Mrs. Farmer had hinted at. The graveyard was situated on a hill overlooking the village, a silent sentinel against the darkening sky. The iron gate creaked open with a mournful groan as Alice stepped inside. The air was thick with the smell of damp earth and decaying leaves. Rows of weathered headstones, some tilted at precarious angles, stretched out before her.
Alice shivered, a sense of foreboding washing over her. She wandered among the graves, reading the faded inscriptions, each one a testament to a life lived and lost in this strange village.
As the sun began to set, casting long shadows across the graveyard, Alice stumbled upon a grave that was different. It was well tended, the headstone recently cleaned. The inscription read, "Judith Farmer, beloved daughter and sister." Alice's breath caught in her throat.
Could this be Mrs. Farmer's daughter? But why was this grave so different from the others? What made Judith Farmer so special?